person. Like Ray's a seasoned person. I did not mean it like that.
Listen, Malcolm.
What's the difference between experienced and seasoned?
Well, experience. I think that experience. You've seen things. You've walked a fine line, and when you're seasoned, you've endured ages. I don't. Oh man, I'm not like
you should stop talking.
So are you saying? So what?
Did I mention I love your wisdom, Ray?
Welcome to Second Take at Eastlake, a podcast of Eastlake Community Church in Irmo, South Carolina. You are invited to join us any Sunday at 9 or 11.
Good news, guys. We're going to get this podcast started, and we have a special guest feature person here, Malcolm, the one and only.
Oh, yeah. He's getting me off that bench, man. I had a few splinters in my backside, but I'm finally off the bench, man. I'm looking to put up a few points now.
See, that's what I'm talking about. Malcolm's gonna bring some heat in this podcast right here.
Y'all crowd around me like Rudy, all right?
Mm-hmm. All right. We found Malcolm out. He was out there. Put me in, coach. No, it's gonna be good. But we're talking today. We're in the Gracism series, Gracism with a G, and it's been a great series. And Pastor Michelle was teaching, and I say Pastor Michelle because I learned a lot in the sermon about how different cultures honor different people, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. And Pastor Michelle brought it up. Now, you probably noticed I don't always call Pastor Michelle. Sometimes I just call her Michelle, just because in my culture, it's a way for me to just be like, it's a way of honoring her, because it's like, she's my friend. We're close enough that we don't have to call each other these things. So like, that's the way I would refer to her, because, it honestly is a kind of a way of saying like, we're friends. This is my friend, Michelle. And like, you leave the formalities aside. However, not every generation is like that. Tell me more about that. There's Kristen.
Yeah,
by the
you're
way.
waving. Yeah. Oh, hi, Kristen.
Hello, Kristen.
She's over here cleaning the cottage.
Oh.
The cottage.
It was the first person that called me pastor regularly was Moyer Donaldson. And I was always like, well, that's a little weird, but okay, it must be, a cultural thing. And then Ray came. And I have learned from Ray, because even when we were away in Israel on our trip, there was another female pastor there. And we were talking about the challenges of being a woman pastor. And she was relating a story about somebody that didn't respect her as a pastor. And so Ray started calling her pastor every time he spoke to her. And then the guy leading our tour started referring to her as pastor. And she was like, no, you don't have to, it's too formal. And they're like, no, the people around you need to understand that you are a pastor. Ooh. And so it's just interesting to watch Ray at work and what he does to make sure that people are elevated that are around him.
Love that. And in African American culture, which Moyer, by the way, she spoke of a guy named Moyer Donaldson. He is an elder at Eastlake, but he is an African American elder. And what is help us understand why in African American culture, calling somebody a pastor is such a big deal? Like, why is that different for that culture versus the culture I grew up in?
Well, this is a very awkward space to be in, for me personally, because I was raised in an African American church, and I fully understand why it's a big deal. Culturally speaking, it was the only place outside of maybe a Black-owned business that persons of color could go and be celebrated. And so you may laugh and jeer at how, when in black church there's all these titles. There's elder this, bishop that, apostle this, reverend that, reverend doctor blah, you know. But the reality is that um, for the longest of time, um, African Americans would not be allowed to go to church with majority culture people.
Mhm.
And if they were put into a place so that they would really not be seen.
Mhm.
And so when we were allowed to be in those spaces, we weren't given any dignity. And so as church history progressed, there began to be churches like the African Methodist Episcopal churches, and we know them now as AME. We've just shortened the term. Those are places that were African American influential churches. And so when you go there, if you were an officer of the church, officer meaning you held an office, so a pastor, an elder, a deacon, a trustee, that we would respect that title because we know a great responsibility came with that title. And being a kid growing up, you learn to respect your elders. The reason why I said earlier that this is a difficult space to be in, because I also know there's been some abuses there. And I'm not just talking about in the African American church, I'm talking in general. You know, those titles have been abused by some people holding them. And so the awkward thing for me is that there's this tension that I wish we held on to some of the honor that came with those, and at the same time could be in this spot of tension that we are friends. And I think what's happened is that the honor has dropped so that we could be friends. And therefore, what happens, especially in majority culture church, I can speak to this because I've been in it for the last 20 years. I think you guys can speak to it even greater, that the officers of the church are seen as common. And so, therefore, when Pastor Michelle preaches, on the occasion that Philip preaches, when you preach, whatever you preach about, I don't care how biblically or exegetically sound it is taken with a consideration, meaning that, oh, that's a nice message. I'll think about that. But in an African American church, if a pastor preached that exact same message, it is in our culture that we are to do whatever was said in the message, not to go home and think about it, not to consider it, but to do it. Because our response to God's word is to be obedient.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, while I'm in this multicultural swimming pool, which I believe is what God wants, I have both parties at play. People they're all about doing what God's word says, and there are people that are like, yeah, that's for somebody else. He wasn't talking to me. That dynamic doesn't exist in the African American church, really. Someone is saying in the seat, he wasn't talking to me. Chances are he was, or she was.
That's interesting. So Malcolm, you're younger. We love you for it. But do you feel like in your generation of African American culture, or even the way you've grown up, do you still feel that, you refer to a pastor as pastor? Do you feel that weight with authority, with like leaders, officers of a church, or is that changing with your generation, or do you still see it and feel it?
So I grew up western suburbs of Chicago, and when I was little, we went to First Chicagoland Church, and I believe, looking back on, because I was so young, the way they preached, I think it was like Pentecostal-ish around there, and it was predominantly white church, but they were cool, and I think that they definitely held the pastor and the clergy with high regard. And, through my teenage years, we didn't attend church as much, but I remember going back and I did my my grandma's funeral, and she's so we were on the south side of Chicago, and their church is very much a Black culture church. And I remember they addressed me and everything as from South Carolina. I mean, South Carolina, Dorothy's baby youngest grandson, Dr. Reverend Malcolm Campbell from Grace Tidings Church in South Carolina, like, gave me all these titles that I was not, but they didn't care. And
You're like a wrestler.
Oh, okay. Like I just remember the embrace. I mean, after at the reception and the repast and everything, when we were eating, I remember nobody could eat until the pastor got his plate, and I had to pray over everything. And I felt weird. I was like, oh, okay, and everything. So that was kind of like my first like real dose of like wow, like there is definitely a lot of respect and honor like given and everything in the Black church. Now, where I see my generation and everything now, because I'm kind of like millennial, Gen Z in a little bit, I think that we so want to be down to earth that we don't say pastor, we call it by, first name or so whatnot. We want to be so authentic or so real that it means something when you just call by the first name for some reason. And that's kind of what I've been used to and everything. So yeah, that's where I feel that it is going. I do feel that pastors have to prove themselves more than they did in my grandma's church and everything like that. Everything is on trial when they preach, or I mean, people are just so awakened to so many issues that they definitely, I guess, want to make sure that the pastor is saying things that are right. So so I see that now pastors are just held every word to a certain standard now. So
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, go ahead, Michelle.
Well, I was just going to say, it brought to mind after the shooting that happened in Charleston, we did a combined service with a local church. I think it is an AME church. And we had a meal together afterwards. And just what Malcolm said about the pastor eating first. And they even so it was Steve Musto was the pastor then, and they elevated he and Kathy at an elevated table. And if you know Kathy, she's like a complete introvert. She just could not wait to get off of that platform where they had elevated them. Not only did they get to eat first, but they were way up here in comparison to everyone else. And so everyone could watch every bite of food they took. And so to me, that's like this example of how these different ways of holding things, what one group of people can mean to honor somebody, makes another group of people really uncomfortable. So
interesting.
It was just a neat thing to see that take place.
So why is it so important? We're talking about Gracism, which is basically, well, I can't sum it up in one sentence. Well, actually, they do a good job in the book of summing it up in one sentence, but I don't have that sentence in front of me. But Gracism and this idea of elevating other cultures, honoring, covering, and all these different things with other cultures. Why is it so important to honor a minority culture? Why does that matter? Why is that in the book? Why do we why do we need to put so much attention on this, to dedicate a whole Sunday towards honoring each other? What would you guys say?
Well, there's a lot of things. Gracism has 8 sayings. And the reason why we believe it is our responsibility to give attention to these is because when you are the minority, and I'm not talking about Ray being Black, I'm just saying if you're the minority woman on staff or the woman in the culture or in the office.
It's true.
It says a lot that when you show honor to the least respected, thought about, considered individual that walks into your business or walks into your church. It says a lot.
Yep.
If Eastlake was, and I love to use this term, if Eastlake was an all-white church, and when a Hispanic person walked in, they were treated as common as everybody else, what would invite that Hispanic person to come back?
Mm-hmm.
Because the fact of the matter is, remember, this person is visiting your church.
Mm-hmm.
So that means nobody else knows this individual.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't go out of your way to introduce yourself to said
Mm-hmm.
visiting Hispanic individual, making them feel seen and welcome and invited into what you enjoy on a regular basis, why would I come back?
Mm-hmm.
Because you've already put an expectation on me to know all the things that you've gotten the chance to find out and discover.
Mm-hmm.
You already have built-in community there because you're regular.
Mm-hmm.
And I have none of those things. And so the importance for us is every Sunday, and it's been happening, every Sunday there are different families from different parts of the country that represent different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
It's on us. We're the host. And what do good hosts do? They welcome the guests.
Welcome. Yep.
They honor the guests.
You know what? I need to say this real quick before anyone else, just real fast, that if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, a white person comes into a majority white place, why does it matter? I would say you need to go and be the only white person in an all black room or an all Hispanic room and see how you feel. And just see, because then you'll see why it matters so much that everybody goes out of their way. For majority culture people, we don't ever really experience that, so we can't relate to that as well. And I will say that when I went to the same funeral that Michelle talked about in her message, and I'm in a choir and I'm the only white dude in that choir, I'm telling you, when they told me that I did a good job and that they were like really trying to be nice to me and they made me feel welcome, they're like, man, this guy can sing. They were saying really nice things. I want to tell you that was one of the best feelings ever. If I was in an all white choir, it wouldn't have mattered because I didn't need it. But when I was in that room, I felt isolated and alone and different. And I got to see what that feels like to be in a minority. And it was everything to me that they respected me and made me feel welcome. So anyways, you guys keep talking.
Yeah. I mean, you know, in college, I would say in college, my college years, I attended a Filipino church, and it was he was worked in physical plant at CIU, Pastor Jake, and I think two of his like deacons worked at the physical plant too. But they had it was a church within a church, and I just remember just soaking in so much of their culture and the way they do things, which was actually not that different. I think for them, being hospitable and hospitality is like really big in their culture, and just, I mean, you know, some would say honor too, but hospitality is like really big. And so I thought it was really cool those years in college, going to international school, being pastored by a Filipino pastor and picking up their culture and everything. And some of my friends would be living with them during the months when we can't stay in the dorms, and just picking up so much and everything. So it's definitely valued, definitely important to celebrate those.
Yeah. Did you have something, Michelle? You don't have to, but no.
No, I was just, it made me wonder, like, what kinds of traditions they have in the Filipino church,
well,
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they definitely are really preaching the word is super important, and being, having the Bible open and the pastor like holding the Bible kind of the whole time to let the people know he's reading from the word is really
Hmm.
important.
That's
And they
interesting.
like, yeah, I mean, so the church we had, they like for all the children to be in the room when, they're preaching and everything. And the kids, they are disciplined enough to sit through a message, and they
I
are
love that.
really big into making like all those who want to preach have the opportunity to preach. So my friend Mitchell and CJ, like every Sunday, they're like, they're like, hey, 10 minutes before the message, can you give like a 5-minute little message before we get into it? Like, I really want you to. So anyone that felt like, or like they would always be asking us, if you felt like you had a call to say something or preach, they're like, let's do that. And
Wow.
so,
Wow.
so yeah, it was really cool. It was really cool. And
Is it,
so
was it kind of Pentecostal flavoring as far as worship, or?
the worship was very it was contemporary. I would say it was kind of it was similar to ours. It was similar to ours because
Okay.
it was a lot of family. Like, it was a lot of larger families that made up the church.
Mhm.
So the worship was very similar to ours. And I can't recall all their instruments. Some of their instruments are very unique. I can't recall them. But yeah, it was similar to ours. But overall, just the opening of the word the whole time. If you felt like you could speak or preach, they wanted you up there saying the word. And the honor was definitely there. And hospitality and eating, they could definitely whip something together. I mean, they really could. So I enjoyed all our anniversaries and everything. So yeah, they're just hospitable, honor, Bible, preach, get on up there. Let's do this type of culture that I
Wow.
embrace with the Filipino culture.
Hmm. That's
That's
cool,
so
dude.
cool.
I did not know that you had that in your background. Very awesome.
Mm-mm.
So,
Mhm.
one of the things that when we talk about honor, and actually, Michelle, this was a great way that you talked about it, was using fairness to discuss honor,
Mm.
because we get tripped up by fairness. You talked about that, and it's just like it is something that really bothers us. We're looking at things as what is fair. We make so many decisions on what we think is fair. But I
Mhm.
mean, Christ never he didn't live life that way. What was fair was not for him to die, so, but yet we do. Anyways, all that to say, how often do you guys feel like that happens when we're talking with people? I mean, do you guys encounter that as pastors, or, as a student pastor, Malcolm with the students, or Michelle with our groups, where people say, well, I just don't think that this is fair. I mean, do you come across that, or is that just me?
No, no, I come across it all the time, and especially when you're talking about racial issues, and how to make things equitable, and how to honor or lift up people who have been dishonored. But how do you do that without taking away what somebody else has worked hard to provide? I mean, it's where this whole conversation gets personal.
Hmm.
And I think it's really easy. I mean, in my own life, it's an area where God has worked, not racially where this is concerned, but because of my divorce and the fact that I am not really living the life that I expected to live. um, I still have to be careful not to think, well, that's not fair. It's not fair that this happened and this
Yeah.
is the result of it, even all these years later. That's not fair. I have to look at what God has done in spite of whatever the circumstances were in my life. And, so I look to God for comfort, and knowing that He is ultimately in control, I have to trust Him
Hmm.
with, He's going to make all things right someday.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that means I still think it's fair, but
Mm-hmm.
it is important for me anyway. I feel like I have to let that idea go. And when I start feeling that way, I have to pay attention to it, because it's usually that I think somebody's getting something better or more than me, who isn't more deserving. And there is pride and condemnation and everything else, you know, in that.
Yep.
So
I've felt
yes,
that
I
way
hear it all the
many
time.
times. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think for students, so I've been really blessed with students who they get it, like they see the, you know, the injustice, they see the, you know, the exclusion that our world, our society has on certain certain people groups, and walking with them through Gracism. I'm like, wow, like they really, it's not like, okay, I understand that there's divisions, like no, they get upset. And so
Wow.
I was like, okay, this is really good. And so they definitely have it in them there. I think for me, I have to remind them in our community, like, you know, what that looks like. Cause there's times where it's like, you know, why don't we have this set up out there? Like, why don't we have the football? Why can't we throw the football out there? Or, you know, why isn't this set up, you know, for Wednesday night? And I have to explain to them, like, listen, if someone drives by and sees a bunch of like, you know, guys just throwing around a football, or Josh throwing around the football, and, you know, see other people like sitting down on the bench, like, what are they going to say about that youth group? Okay, they're kind of clicking up, you know. The reason why we have the 9 square out there is anybody can play 9 square, boy, girl, you know, athletic, unathletic, you know, no one really
Yep.
cares. It's a goofy game. Leaders can play it. You know, that's why we have the video games. Anybody can play video games. Anybody can play apple to apples and stuff like that. So I have to remind them, you know, and then, you know, the basketball hoops out there, anybody can just throw a basketball. I remind them our, you know, activities reflect inclusion and diversity. And so that's why we do it. And, you know, and so just having to like sometimes just remind them why we do it. When we were in Gatlinburg for our trip last year, some of the guys, you know, some of the groups were like, because I said we can go off in two, I think we can go off in twos. But some of them like, hey, we're staying, this group, y'all are staying in a group of 6. Well, why can't we just go off? Because hey, y'all know I love you, but y'all are starting to forget what this trip is about. We're going in a group of 6 and we're staying together with these groups. We're not leaving anybody behind. So I think sometimes just nudge them, remind them. But for the most part, I'm really proud of where our, you know, our students are, you know, in the bigger picture right now.
That's so cool.
Younger generations always pick up this stuff much faster. And that's a gift. We need to listen. We need to listen to our younger generations, because they usually are getting these things. They don't have as much baggage and history, you know?
Yeah, there's so much that we can offer one another, like cross-generational.
Uh-huh.
I must have missed something. What are we
I'm
laughing
absorbing the
at?
compliments. I'm loving it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I could take
Yeah. It's good. I mean, I'll say that, like, for me, I need to be putting myself in more places where I feel like I get to feel the feeling of needing, like, not being in a majority culture. It's important for me to put myself into environments, because that helps me to see these things and what's fair and what's not fair, and kind of get over that for myself anyways. I'll say that, but it's not natural. What's natural for me to do is to hang out with a lot of people just like me, and it's just a lot easier to do that. But yeah, so as an adult, that's almost the only way that I can start to see things the other way, is to put myself in those environments. But yeah. So here's one more. I want to get us on one more topic. We have just a few more minutes, but let's talk about kind of owning. We talked about this today in a meeting with all of us, and we were, here was what I wrote down. My notes were, have we as a country ever really recognized the things that we've done to other cultures? So as a country, and this is not me trying to be a hater on our country, I love our country, but have we really recognized some of the things that we've done, like to Native Americans, for instance? Because this isn't just a black-white thing. This is, do you guys feel like we've owned some of the things that we've done? And like, how do you get reconciliation for that?
You know, I don't know who's all listening on this podcast, but I'll say this. if you are reasonably well traveled, meaning that you've been outside the continental USA, you know, in other places, there is a prevailing thought about Americans that we're entitled, that we are snobbish, and one other thing, we're unrepentant and, if not ignorant, about our past. And when you're in other countries, that's what they have a problem with, by and large, about America or Americans. When you think about the Holocaust, you know that Germany admitted their sins. Okay. We saw a wall come down. And so there is evidence that there is a moving on. If you've ever visited Rwanda, I think it's 28 years today, but let's just say when I was there in 2019, they were celebrating their 25th year anniversary of being one nation, not divided, when prior to that, they had an entire genocide between the Tutsis and Hutus, because Belgians came in and told them that one group was more superior than the other one based on the width of their noses, and they began to kill one another. Neighbors were literally killing their neighbors. And to go to Rwanda and see that they are one nation, and they say they unashamedly say this will never be divided again. And here we are at the ripe young age of right up under 300 years old as a nation, and we have these things that we have yet to fully reckon with. You brought up the Native American, so yeah, we kind of said what we did was wrong, but we didn't nationally admit that. So there was money given to tribes, and they were put on land that nobody else wanted and left alone. To the African American who were brought over by European settlers, colonists, where was the formal apology? And please don't say, well, civil rights. As a nation, we have not apologized. We have not attempted to make restitution or anything to any of those matters. The one that we did was with the Asians on the West Coast that were put into camps, that were working on railroads and things like that. We gave reparations, so to speak, and this is not about reparations. I'm just using that word because that's the term that was used to make right what was done wrong to the Asian community. And so it grieves me that this is something that even today is being debated in spaces about our whole history and about leaving certain things out.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember.
Go ahead, Malcolm. I'm sorry.
Well, I just remember us being at Mosaics, the multicultural conference down in Dallas, and right now, like on my free time, I'm writing a little novel, and my main character is Native American, and so I saw a Native American, I believe it was college, that had a booth up at the conference. And so, I went up to him. I had a great conversation with him, like over the next 3 days. And I asked him, like, so does it offend you, like, to have like sports teams, like, the Washington Redskins, stuff like that? Like, how do you feel about them changing their name? And he's like, honestly, man, our tribe, we don't care about that. Like, we really don't. Like change the name, like, like pour more into our community. That's what we care about. Forget the names. Like, that don't bother us. What are you doing for our community? And so when I look at it, are we just doing kind of like the surface level things with some people groups that have been wronged? Or are we genuinely looking to affect, change, in our intentionality? Like, are we doing that? And so that was just a moment where I'm like, oh wow, like that totally, man, that makes sense.
I think this conversation is this is the place where fairness enters in, at least when I hear it in discussion. Because what people will say is, yes, I think it is terrible that we moved the Native Americans off their land. Yes, I think it's terrible that we enslaved and brought from Africa all these people. Yes, I think that's terrible, but I didn't do that. We're such an individualized culture that we have a hard time getting our brain around doing something collectively. And so I think that's where it happens, is people are like, well, yeah, that's all well and fine, but I didn't do any of those things. And you're asking me to, and you can fill in the blank, whatever that is. And so I think that's where the fairness thing comes in. And so I think that there's a difference between owning what a nation has done right or wrong, or owning what we've done right or wrong as individuals in our lives, or even in our family's history. And so that's what's hard for people to understand.
Philip, you noticed when you asked the question about fairness, I did not respond. And you could rewind this and go back, and I did not respond. And the reason why I didn't respond is because there's a part of me that has lived in a context that hasn't been fair for so long that I don't expect fairness.
Yeah.
I mean, you think this is just a little piece of history. When slavery was abolished in 1865, I believe it was, the slave owners were paid by the government because they felt that they lost property, meaning the enslaved people. They were paid money and given land, but the people that were enslaved got nothing. So how is that even fair? You're in short saying, I've released you. Now you got your freedom.
Yeah, but
you have no place to stay.
right.
You have no money because you were never paid for the work that you did.
Right.
And so what? They got paid, but the actual people that did the work got nothing. And so as you follow that down the historical trail, and you hear things like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, well, that's interesting to even say, because they didn't have boots. So what are they supposed to do with that? And even to think about it today, and I'll use this not about me, I have to intentionally say to a female that has gone through whatever right she needed to go through to become who she is, that I find it absolutely necessary to honor her, because there's a culture that doesn't.
Yeah.
Now, she went through the same education. She may have even gone through more. In most cases, she has. But she doesn't get the respect. But like I said, I've lived so long with things being unfair that I don't expect them to be. And so when it is, I'm kind of taken by surprise.
So I don't know how much this relates to it, but this does relate to it. But and trying to understand, like, but I did not do it. So why should I be apologizing, or why should I feel like so this example is during our Gracism conversation, my students at our table, because we have just a table for students. The white students at my table were letting me know, hey, Malcolm, African Americans at my school give us, it's called the N-word pass, where a black student allows or gives permission for a white student to say derogatory, African American, words and racial slurs, which I thought was crazy. And they're like, yeah, like, so I'm always having to defend, saying that, no, I'm not, and everything. And so I looked at them after they told me how much they always have to fight this and argue with their friends over this. I told them, listen, I am sorry that someone that looks like me has tried to teach you that falsehood, and I got you, I got your back, but I'm sorry that you went through that and you experienced that. And I'm definitely going to lift you up and encourage you and thank you for fighting on my behalf by not choosing, that. But in that situation, I didn't say that. I didn't teach him that, but I'm acknowledging that people like me did put that in, try to. And I'm just saying, I'm sorry that someone like me did that, and so I equate that to, hey, listen, I'm sorry, talking to my white brothers and sisters, that, 300 some years ago or 50, 70 years ago, that someone like me did this to you. And I'm going to do my best to cover you and encourage you and honor you, because I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you made it to this point in your family line. So that makes sense. Like, that's what I'm
Makes a
thinking
lot
of.
of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to wrap up, one, because my battery is about to go dead, but also because we're out of time. But, as all of you guys are talking, the thing that just keeps coming up for me is, will I get to heaven and somebody say, you honored too much, you loved too much, you were too gracious? No. Oh, I'm so glad, Philip, you lived life fair. No, I'm going to err on the side of love. We want to err on the side of honor, of covering, of standing. And if you do it too much, I don't think it's possible. But let's get to the end of our lives and that be the complaint. Man, Philip honored people too much. He just wouldn't be quiet about it. What a great compliment. So, I want to get off the fairness talk and get on to, let's just over and abundantly be too generous, too gracious, too loving with everybody that we meet. Oh, you treated a homosexual too nice. Well, then so be it. You know what? Then so be it. You love somebody that, I'm getting fired up now, but you guys get what I'm saying. And this is what I'm learning while you guys are talking. I'm just sitting here thinking, but yeah, I really do appreciate getting to do ministry with you guys, and we are growing together because we get to have these talks. And yep. But
and it might even be biblical for us to be known by our love, Philip. Imagine that.
And not by our fairness.
Or the things we're against. Yeah.
Yes. So use that next time somebody says, oh, you go to that woke church, Eastlake. Use that. Tell them that. Just tell them, well, you know what? If we're too kind, too loving, too noticing of minorities, then let that be the story. Man.
Amen.
All right, guys, I got to sign off. I'm getting too fired up, but this has been good. We love everybody. Yeah. See you guys later.
All right.
Take care, y'all.
Eastlake Community Church is an intentional, multicultural community empowered by the Holy Spirit. We passionately pursue a loving relationship with God and everyone Jesus was sent to die for, here, near, and far.